Today's daf is daf Nunvav. We are up to the Mishnah. We were till now discussing the different laws of treifas when it comes to an animal. Now we're going to discuss a bird. And the Gemara is going to introduce to us that two kinds of birds. There's the ordinary bird, and then there's a seabird. A seabird is like geese, ducks, birds that generally hang around the water, and the difference would be birds that hang around the water, their membranes are much thinner, and they're not as not healthy. Is the wrong word to use, but they don't have such firm protections like an ordinary bird does. Now, there are two parts of a bird. When we learn smicha, we learn all about it, but now just to remind us, there's a thing called a zephyr and a thing called a kurkumin. So when the bird eats through the esophagus, the first place that the food goes into is a little sac called the crop. The crop, which is the zephyr. Zephyr is basically just a storage. The food goes in there so the bird then can fly away, because otherwise it'll be easy prey. And it flies away, and then the food is already sitting somewhere being stored in this zephyr. And then from there, it travels to the next stage, which is called the kurkun, which is in English called the gizzard, which basically chops it up and does all the digestion. So the gizzard obviously is very, very important, because that's where, without the gizzard, you can't eat. The crop also is important because that's where he stores the food. Okay, so we have the kurkumin and we have the zephyr. Said the Mishnah, Daf Nun Vav Amud Aleph on top of the page. The following are treifas by a bird. Nikoivas havesha, just like we learned before, by an animal. In fact, the general rule is whatever's treif by an animal is treif by a bird. A puncture in the esophagus, uptukas hagageres, a slit in the trachea. Huksa chulda alreisha. If a weasel banged the head of a let's say of a hen or a chicken, mokum sha'oisa right above the brain, where basically renders it treif if it passes through the membranes, as we'll see. Nikiv hakurkuvin. So if the kurkuvin, which is the gizzard, has a puncture, and that means it can't really function properly to digest the food. Nikvo hadakin, if the intestines were punctured. Noflo le'ur, the bird fell into a fire, and then the inners. But sometimes means literally the stomach, sometimes means the entire contents of the inner shrinks. Im yerukim, if it changes color and becomes, remember we had before, Tracy says that three different colors, green, blue, yellow, but over here it can mean either green, we generally say, or maybe yellow, or maybe blue. Psulim, it is possible. And the Gemara will discuss more about what do you mean change of color. But the fact that it changed the color reflects that the burn had an effect and eventually is going to bear a hole. Im adumim, but if it remained red, which is the natural color, then the fire didn't have really any impact. Dorsa, what happens? An animal came along and clawed this bird or this chicken or hen. Vitarfa because banged it against the wall. Oisheritzta behema or an animal came along and stepped on it, trampled on it. But if the bird, even though the bird is jumping around, fluttering around, but it can stand up. Remember we learned before, if a bird can stand up, or if an animal can walk, then it's no problem. If it can stand up, then you still have to do b'dika. But if but you waited 24 hours, which will do by an animal as well, and then v'shachli shaded, it is kosher. Says the Gemara,
animal has remained alive for 24 hours.
Same test as by a bird. If the bird remains alive after this another 24 hours, it means that the bird is all right. There wasn't permanent damage. Says the Gemara, Rav and Shmuel and Levi. The Amr, they say that if a chulda came along and banged a bird, a hen, you want to know whether it became treif, did it hit it at a place and made a treif? Where would it make a treif? Bang the head, break through the skull, and it would make a pierce the membrane. So how do you test the membrane? How do you test the membrane of a bird? We'll look at this test. So if you want to test, we're talking about the treifas of a bird right now, which are very similar to an animal. And the last thing we learned was that if a weasel goes along and takes the bird and hits it or bangs against the wall or something, and makes a treif. So what makes a treif? That it pierces through the membrane around the brain. How do we test that? It comes along Rab and Shmuel, right in the Gemara from above. Rab, Shmuel, and Levi. The Amr, they say, Machnis yad lifnim, poke your finger inside the mouth, the back of the mouth of the bird, and go upwards. Ubaidik, and you press the brain upwards. Now, if there is a hole in the membrane, the brain will bulge out. If the brain comes through comes through, they know there's a hole there. Now remember, there are two membranes around the brain, and we had an argument before whether both membranes have to be pierced before that. Let's say the animal's treifa and the bird and the animal same thing, or just even one membrane is enough. Now, what's your test? That it goes through, but you can see it on the outside. So this follows the view that the only time his treif is if both membranes were pierced. If you follow the opinion that even just the inner membrane was pierced, or just the outer membrane is pierced, one membrane is pierced is treif, then this test is not going to work because maybe the other membrane, the inner membrane, is still intact. Only the outer membrane has a hole, but it won't come through. And so how's that test going to be effective? The one that says that both of them inside the outer membrane, but also the inner membrane have to be pierced, and it's a good test because if it comes through, then fine. The one that says that even the outer membrane has a slight hole that makes a treif, even though the inner membrane is still intact. No, what does this test help? Let's be concerned that maybe only the outer brain, the outer membrane was pierced, not the inner one. Says the Gemara, because the inner membrane by a bird, especially, is so thin that if you're going to pierce it through, it's going to just your finger alone is going to make a hole there. So therefore, if there's a hole, if there's a hole on the outer membrane alone, and you're worried that how do we know it's safe if the inner membrane is intact? It won't be intact for long because when you're pressing it, it's going to make a hole. Because it's so soft, it'll also be pierced when you're putting your finger through. Says the Gemara. It says, there's no way of checking if a chulda bites.
That's a question on the first person.
There's no question at all. We're saying either way, whether you hold that one brain is both, meaning both membranes to be a whole, then for sure no problem. When you put the brain through, if it comes through, you know that both of them have a hole. But even if you hold like the view that that even just one hole on the outer membrane makes it safe, so we're asking what's the point of testing it? It'll never come out because the inner membrane is intact. So we're answering no, it won't be. Because the inner membrane is so thin and so tender that when you're going to press with your finger the brain upward, it's going to make a hole now. And we don't care about that hole now. We don't.
Doesn't that impact the first person?
What do you mean?
The test shouldn't work on the first person because maybe the reason it came through is because of your finger. The first person who said both have to be a problem, right?
The question, maybe you just made the hole right now.
Yeah.
Good point. Because if you made the right day hole, you need both to be treif.
What you're saying is that the outer membrane is much stronger. So
Yeah, but that when you bang
you're not necessarily going to be pierced by pressing.
no, the outer membrane you're not going to pierce. The outer membrane is when the chulda goes and does whatever it does, right? With the claws. That's the outer membrane. The question is, did it pierce through the inner membrane as well? So Chaim is asking, according to the opinion that you need both to be pierced. How do you know who the inner membrane was pierced before by the chulda or by your finger now when you're going through? Good question. Good question. Okay, so now you can't do b'dika when it comes to chulda weasel. Why? If a chulda bit, there's no way of checking whether there's a hole if it's treif or not. There's no way of checking. So the gemara v'chishineh dak has small teeth. You can still check if it's a tiny hole, a tiny puncture. What's the difference in the size? So the gemara. In other words, even if it punctured the outer membrane or whatever, putting your brain up, it's not going to come out. So we said, why not? So the puncture is very small. Something will come out. Something will ooze out of it. So the not only is it small, but they're also on a slant. So therefore, the hole is not right straight above. Because it's on a slant, the hole is sort of facing a different direction. Nothing will come out. It's like the skin is overlapping and won't let anything come out. When he went to the doi, he sent to them, this is what I told you, I made a mistake. But he also said, I made an error. But in truth, they said, yes, you can check a chulda what? Okay, not with pressing the brain out, but take your finger and just go over it. And if your nail or whether your finger gets caught in a hole, you know there's a hole. If not. Don't use a nail. Because the nail itself might create a new hole. Which is similar to your question there that you're poking. But Rabbi Yechon says also with a nail. Big machlekes of the shainim and Achreim how to understand whether af mesam means you have a choice. So is Rabbi Yechon saying you can use your hand and you can use a nail, or is Rabbi Yechon saying that even if you use your hand, you still need to use a nail because a nail, I guess, is finer in a way, and if there's a tiny hole, it'll be easier to catch it if you have a nail going over it than if you're going with your finger. And this is actually a machlekes tanaim. Very interesting over here. Sounds like more like a shitta. Should one be machmer by hichos treifus or should one be mekel? Chad bodig b'yada. One of them was bodig with his hand, and chad bodig b'machte. One of them bodig with a needle. Man the body be the one was body with his hand. Amalei the man the body mach the one body with his hand. Says the one with the needle. Ad mostly at the mechala moin Yisrael. You know how often it will be that the nail itself will cause the hole, and people are going to be so machmer. That's the biggest chumrah. In other words, being machmer too much, you're mechala moin Yisrael. Have rachmanis we had before. Tell have rachmanis on Jewish on Yiddish geld. Amalei, the one that says man the body b'machta, but the one who used the machta was very frum, said to the man the body b'yoda ad mosat machal yisol nevelus until when you're going to feed it with trade, because with the finger you don't really detect a tiny microscopic hole, and therefore people think it's kosher and really treif. So one guy says it's an interesting shit. One guy says you have to be machmer as much as possible, otherwise you're being treif. The one says you have to have rachmanis Yiddish geld, and don't be so machmer. Telling what an avelis. Okay, you shechted the bird and turns out to be this treif. That's not avel. Avel means that you touch it, you become tummy. Should only be treif. But schuti, it's shachten properly, so it should be treif. Elo treifus. You're right. I meant treifus. Why shemanik of krem shalmei? We're worried that maybe you're going to make a hole with a nail. So others want to say that Rabbi Yechon is not taking a side here in the Tanaim, because Rabbi Yechon is talking about a needle. He's talking about he says he's a needle versus they're saying using a nail, they're saying using a needle. A needle has even a sharper point than a nail does. So Birchen said, I don't say you just use a needle. A needle, maybe I agree with that you're going to cause holes. I'm saying use a nail. A nail is thicker. So the chances of you causing a hole with a nail is far less. And therefore it's better using a nail, because then you'll pick up, tiny little holes. This time, let's conclude. Rabbi Yehuda the body biyad. He's the one that said use your hand. The time in the Bryce of Shimon Lozer. Remember Rabbi Yehuda. Boikin l'chulu biyad. You check. Your name Rabbi Yehuda. You check with your hand. Don't use a nail. Clear. So Rabbi Yehuda is the one that says use your hand, because he says at masa at the mechala v'moinu sheyisrael. If you're too frum, you're going to cause people to throw things out. Nishbar etzem. What was in Mike the Rub? The Rub was always Makel. They asked him why is he always Makel? In Hilchos Treifus. So he says, it says in Pasuk, I'm trying to remember now. It says in Pasuk like Kelev Tashlich L'Noisei. You should always throw it to the dog. And the problem is that dogs are very machmer, because whenever you throw them, they're going to eat. So therefore, we don't want to be compared to a Kelev. And Nishbar Etzim. If the bone broke, if the bone broke. Afapi, even though we'll talk about the bone in a minute, even though Shaloi Nikiv,
the skull?
well, yeah, we're talking about the skull. Even though Shaloi Nikiv, even though you didn't pierce the membrane of the Mayach, we'll see what that means. It's time, so clear of you. So I understand. Amre boikin l'chul biyad. You said you should check the membrane with your hand. That was not with a nail. In other words, the skull alone is broken. It's not enough to make a treif. You have to now check the membrane. Clearly, the skull alone is broken. Nothing happens. It's only we check the membrane. Did the membrane pierce through a well? Alma islam dekusa. Therefore, you can be baited. And then then you say if the skull broke, even though the membrane didn't get punctured, it's treif. You don't even need to puncture the membrane. Alma less dekusa. You can't be baited. What's going on here? Saying about a safer awesome mayim. Here we're talking about a water bird. A water bird. Why? A water bird has no membrane, so therefore the skull is broken. It's treif. Everyone brain have a membrane. So the membrane is so tender that if it's not a good protection. It's not really a good coating. It doesn't really protect if it doesn't have the bone of the skull above the brain to protect it. He said, my master, said name is Shmuel, Bodig Biyoda Machsher, he was baited with his hand in Machsher. And Vahuna Chabri number Rav, but Huna, our friend, said the name of Rav, Bodig Biyoda Machsher, that he was, both of them said in different number that you just take your hand, no, don't use a nail, don't use a needle, just take your hand and go over the membrane to see whether there's a hole there or not. All those treifers that are listed by Behema, connected by everything by a bird. Yes, and the bird has one more additional, that if the bone, the skull broke, the same thing we had before in the Braita, even though the membrane of the Mayach wasn't pierced, it's treif, and you tell me you still have to check with your hand. In other words, if there's no hole there, everything's kosher. Same answer. I'm like, who that's a water bird. Krum has no membrane. Is very tender. Similarly, there was a hand. Different stories. Yeah. Now we have a third story similar. Ahitana goes over the hand of a bit of chana. Suddenly come to the master and nish but it's equal from shalmeich. He said, "Oh well, the skull broke, but there's no problem with the membrane. Kosher." This is very interesting. He said to him, "Vatani Levi, this Rav Chana, who sent the Shaila to Rav Masna, and Rav Masna was Mekel, said kosher. Rav Chana said, but I know that it's treif, because Levi said treif is Rav Chana Mehem, Kunen Ma'if, yes, Alim Ma'if, Nish B'Etzam, Nico Kruz Ma'if, even though there's no puncture Ma'if. Amalei Hasan Ba'if Shemaim, Ha'if Ein L'Krum. Ein L'Krum has no memory, Elaim Ha'if L'Krum Irach. Interesting. So Rav Chana thought he knew the answer to the Shaila, and yet he didn't want to pass it for himself. He still asked the Shaila. Very interesting lesson in life. That that as everyone said, that knowing smicha tells us at least what we know what the shaylos are. Lav dafka, we have to answer it ourselves. You can ask another of. Taking about it further, and had he answered himself, he would have made a treif. Rav Shizbi, Bodig B'Shimshon, Rav Shizbi, he used to check put in the sun the membrane to see if there are any holes or punctures or anything else, because the sunlight tells shows you everything. He checked the water. Rashi is an interesting thing. When we check the water, Rashi says he would take out the brain. He would go into the membrane, take out the entire contents of the brain and fill it with water and see if it's leaking anywhere. Yeah, and we take out and the part that connects to the spine. That's where that's where the hole was, and that's where they filled it with water. He would check it, but we had it before. He would take a stalk of wheat and he would go over it slowly.
No, I ask?
He said, done our geese. Hello?
Yeah. Is this for every shkita, or is this where you suspect there's been a head injury?
No, we're talking about over here that you saw the bone was broken, and now we had to check to see whether the membrane also was pierced or not.
So there's something looks wrong.
Grounds. Yeah, you have grounds. We'll see actually much later whether we check ever without having grounds. These kachkas, these geese, ducks, because they used to hang around the water, and therefore it's treated like. So that means that, which is a chumrah, that if the skull is broken, we don't even bother checking the membrane because it's treif. Nafel, or then it says in the Mishnah, if the bird fell into a fire and there's a discoloration and there's chamur, sort of shriveled bit, and the discoloration turned green or blue, whatever, turned a different color, it becomes treif. And how much does it have to turn green before we say it's treif? And just like, imagine it be punctured. What did we learn before? How big, the large does the puncture have to be? Mashu, the slightest amount. Mashu, if it turns green, the slightest amount. On these inners, the B'mayim, it is treif. If the son of Shimon Levi asked his father, what about if the liver, let's say, turned green? What would it then be? Right, the part of the liver facing the intestines. Malay treifa. Wow, it's treifa. So he asked his father, Lo Yehel and Yitla. We learned before, if the entire liver is missing, it's kosher as long as a kazai is left over or mash is left over. So part of it turned green. Why should it become treif? Amarava kima shahirika kaveh kinege b'nei mayim. Because since which section of the liver are we talking about here? We're talking about the section of the liver that is facing the most important part, facing the intestines. So it's obviously what caused that to happen. The discoloration. It must have fell in a fire. It seems like it was a common thing then. The nechman of b'nei ma'ayim, and therefore it got shriveled and anything else. The treif, and therefore it renders it treif, because eventually it will grow, the whole thing will fall apart. And Shimon Levi had this Tarnagoyla is Shada. He said this again. Shimon Levi paskins, but for themselves, you see here, they wouldn't want to paskin for themselves. They would send it to another Rav. So Shimon Levi, he had his hen. Shadre lekame de Rabbi Lazar hakofa beribi. He sent it to Rabbi Lazar hakofa beribi. The Rashi says, Godel hadoy. Amalei, he said to him, you can have and he said to him, well, the green, right? The green, and v'achsher, it says kosher. Now we just learned in the Mishnah that if it's green, it's not kosher. The Mishnah learned in Mishnah, Yerukim psulin, that if it was green, it's possible. So Gemara says, when do we say for discolored? It has to be discolor. In other words, if the normal color there is red and it turns green, that's a sign of trephus. But if the normal color is green and then you see it's green, and even though it went to the fire, that's not a discoloration. That is its natural color. Only when it comes to the kurkumin, which is the gizzard, that's the second sac where they actually digest the food, because normally it should be red. Now it's green. Believe, ubekaved, the heart, the liver. These are all things that normally are red from the blood and everything else, and now they're green. Oh, that's a discoloration. But the intestines, they're generally green, as that part there, greenish. So therefore, there's no discoloration there. So the Gemara, the tiny number we learned, which bnei ma'im are we talking about discoloration that what became green possible? The kurkuv in the gizzard, believe the heart, the cover the liver. He had his hand. The same thing. He had a shaila. He said it's treif. The intestines are red. The intestines are red with treifa. Now, what was the problem with the intestines? They're red. So they asked, when the Mishnah, adumik shading, red is kosher. Adumin, what, when we say red is kosher, is that it's normally red and it's red. But if it's normally green, like the intestines that turned red, that's a discoloration for the intestines. So it's not a fixed color, it's discoloration. Adumin shahiriku, red that became green, that's treif. Or yeruki shadimu, green that became red, that's treif. But when we say red is kosher, these parts, the heart, the gizzard, and the liver, because they're normally red. And if it's red, it's kosher. Shmuel says, red. Shahidika became green. Then what happened with the shulchan? Okay, became green l'chayda, that's a sign of treif. He cooked it, and it reverted back to red. What do we do now? If we would have passed it right then and there, we would have made treif and thrown it, tossed it away. But for whatever reason, it was cooked, and suddenly it came back to its original color. So he says, "Shading, my timer, kutra aibu. That must have been smoke or something on the surface that caused it to discolor. But as soon as you get rid of that surface, it came back to its original color, which means, in essence, it's still healthy and it's kosher." We say, if so. So let's say, if so, let's be machmir now. Every time, let's say you look at the liver, let's say you went to the fire, you're worried, you look at the liver, and it's still red. You'll say it's kosher, right? Why? Cook it and see what happens. Maybe really it'll be green. Maybe really be treif. And just the surface, whatever reason, it stayed the same color. The same cheshbon you made that you say it became kosher because it reverted back to the color. Maybe it'll change colors when you cook it. Let's be machmir. My time of why so he's saying here, if you did it, if it was red, the liver, and it went to, we got near the singeing of fire, and it still looks red, and if you cooked it and it became green, it's treif. Why? Because we're going to say igloya bahasayu, that now it revealed that the surface was just preventing the new color to come in, but now that it even though it looked red, but when you cooked it turned green, that means it's no good. So Rabashi says, nobody should ever eat chickens and hens unless you cook it first and see what the real color is, or the liver, the liver of it, or the kurkumin, or the heart. This is your question. We don't go ahead and make tests to determine make it treif. If you have no reason to be choishes, we're not choishes. In fact, that's what we had Rashi a few days ago. We don't check any of the treifas in the animal, only by a lung. We don't check any of the other treifas because we assume that it's kosher. If you trap, if it was a clawed, or you banged against the wall, or other than it is, and then we say if it walks, 24 hours later, it survives, it's all good. Whether the case of Drosa clawed, whether it banged against the wall, even though it waited 24 hours, doesn't mean automatically it's mutter, and now you check it. If it didn't survive 24 hours, don't talk about it. But if it survived 24 hours, you have to check it. Mishnah. Just like by Behema, we have two missions, one that says what's treif, one that says kosher. Same thing here. The following are kosher by a bird. Nikva hagar geres, it is a puncture. Just like by an animal, a puncture in the trachea. Or there was a crack in the length of the trachea, before we said by an animal is kosher too. Or if a chulda, weasel, hit the bird on the head, but see the back of the head, not on top of the brain, but the back of the head, which doesn't render it treif. Nikiv has zefik. Here, what happens if the zefik, which is the crop, which is where they store. So when the bird starts eating, the first place it goes is into the crop, and it's a sack, which it collects the food. Nothing happens; it just sits there, and then from there it travels down to the gizzard. So zefik is where it sits there. A puncture there is not going to make it past the treif, because it just sits there. The food is not digesting anything else. Rebbe argues. He says afilu nitl. He says even if the entire crop is moved, it's still removed. Nittel is still kosher. it continues to go straight down the esophagus into the gizzard. Yotsu b'nei me'er, what happens if the bird had a big cut and its intestines fell out, but still attached? The loin nikvu, no punctures, but it's no longer inside the bird. Nishtabru gaper, what happens if its wings were broken? Nishtabru ragla, excuse me. Its legs were broken, but beneath the erkuva. Now we have a machlekes by an animal. An animal has, we only have one knee. An animal has like two sets of knees: a lower one, a lower erkuva, and a higher erkuva. The section between the two erkuvas normally is called sheik, which we call thigh by a person, and then the higher part is called yerech, the thigh. They both mean thigh. In fact, the machlekes of sheik means thigh, or sheik means the lower part. Right? When it comes to a person regarding the laws of knees, but by an animal, there's two sections. Between the lower knee and the top and the high knee is called the sheik, and between the higher knee, that there's joints, and the hip is called the thigh. Bird has the same thing. So if it's below the akuva, see later on machlek is which akuva we're talking about, below the higher akuva or below the lower akuva, but that does not render the bird treif. Nishtabru gaper nishtabru nimretu kanafer. What happens if he has this large wing that basically covers the entire bird? And all of these things here, it's kosher. Rabbi Yehuda says, "Im not lahanoitze psula." Rabbi Yehuda said that if the noitze, noitze is the small little feathers on the body of the bird itself, not long ones, very small ones, they're like attached to the flesh of the bird.
They call them pin feathers.
I don't know. Is that what it's called? Im not lahanoitze psula, it's possible. If it's missing, it's possible. Says the Gemara, there's a story of they once went to Lud, because you have to decide to determine whether leap year or not. In Eretz Yisrael, they spent Shabbos in a city called Oinoi, wherever that is. And they ruled regarding tapachas. They ruled regarding a tapachas which we had before, tapachas, shalfuchis, and the what do you call the aim is all called uterus. And they pascha they don't say what they pascha, they just made a psak there. And then they also rule like Rebbe when it comes to zefik. They rule like Rebbe that not only a puncture in the zefik is kosher, but even the entire zefik is taken as kosher. They asked the question, what do they pascha b'tapachas? Did they pascha the tapachas liyisura? Did they pascha that it's also no, not like we learned now Gemara here, but rather like the Gemara Sanhedrin says, Tarfon says that it's nitla aim, that it's possible, it's treif, and it's liyisura. And did they pascha like Rebbe when it comes to zefik lehetera, that if even the entire crop is missing, it's still kosher? Or did they paskin dilma hoyru b'tapachas lehetera kerebi bezefik? Or did they pass like the mission we had before, that if the entire time the uterus is missing, it's still kosher, like the mission here, not like the Gemara Sanhedrin. It's one thing, not two different dinim, it's one din. Just like they be paskin by zefik is kosher, so too they paskin that nitla the tapachas is kosher. That's what they're saying. They're not saying we paskin like Rebbe when it comes to zefik, but we're just saying just like Rebbe holds zefik is kosher is missing, so too by the tapachas. But they don't really hold like Rebbe when it comes to the zefik if it's totally missing. What's a teikum? Omar Abba said to Rabbi Levi, Gagoy shel zefik nidin kevei. We had before that a slightest puncture in the veshet, in the esophagus makes it treif. And then the esophagus goes straight into the crop, into the zefik. And the zefik, a puncture, everyone holds it's kosher. The question is whether it's totally missing or not, what happens. So which section of the esophagus, where does the esophagus end and where does the crop begin? So he says that the gagosh zefik, the roof of the zefik, is treated like a vesha, which means a puncture there is a problem. It's a problem. Where is that? That where it goes on a slant, where the crop is not a round ball, but where the crop sort of now becomes very thin and narrow to attach itself to the vesha, that section is treated legally like a vesha, not like a crop. Talking about it further, it says that if the b'nei ma'ayin, if it fell out, if the intestines fell out, the bird is still kosher. So he says, but what happens, and you put it back inside. So what as long as you put them back inside the same way it was originally. If you turned it upside down, then treif, it can't work properly, and the bird's going to die. So it's treif. The Chsiva says the pasuk, "Who ascha vayichay." He built you, and he built you in a certain format, exactly the way it's supposed to be. One's on top of each other. No, one's a base and one is on top. Melamed Rosh Kain is bottom. He made a base. She'im nepech achel men any yochalichas. If you turn it around, you turn the base and make it. If you turn the intestines upside down, it's no good. Tanya Omer, who ascha vayichay. He that Karcha the Kulu Bay. He made it a metropolis that everything is there. Who Oscha? He made you Vayichay. He turned you into that. We have everything that we need. What do we have? Everything we need. Like a metropolis has everything in there. Mimenu Kainov. We have the Kainim. Mimenu Nevi'ah. All the Nevi'im come from the Eden. Mimenu Sarav, all the officers. And Mimenu Malka of the king. Remember it says. It says the pasuk Mimenu. It says the pasuk Mimenu Pina. Mimenu Yesed. Mimenu Keshes. Everything comes from them. Ahuda, there was this guy, a Roman, the Chazia, that's very interesting here. The Chazia saw the Hugaba, a person enough from the eagle Ara. He saw that somebody fell from the ground, from the roof to the ground. And Poka Karse, he had a split in his stomach and his intestines fell out. The Nafug Mayana and his intestines fell out. Asil Libre, he took the guy's son, Vishachte Kamei, and he made an illusion as if he shechted his son, like he split a body in half in the magic shows, as if he cut the body in half. Ingid, the guy gave a krecht, the guy who was lying there with his intestines out of his stomach, he gave a krecht, and when he pulled himself back, the isnich, he gave a moan and a groan, and then he breathed back. Olemine, his intestines were drawn back into his stomach, and right away, the chaytil lekasha, he stitched them up and he gave him his first operation. That was actually not the first we had in the seventh painting as well. And why he did that is because if he would have touched it with his hand, he might have killed him. He wanted the guy had to do it by himself, and he was a brilliant guy, this guy here, and he worked out a way of how the guy can draw it back in, and then he stitched them up, and here was a classic first operation with no anesthetics, nothing. Anyway, have a good day. Tomorrow, Mitzvah.